It is my pleasure to welcome you to our second lecture of our Tuesday Night Learning series. I am the new chair this year. It's closer. I am the new chair for the program. I have big shoes to fill, but I hope you'll bear with me as we try to continue Louis Dobrin's great work. My name is Ina Nekem, and this evening we have with us Dr. Alla Shapiro. She is a fellow former Soviet Union immigrant. I came to Canada, she came to the United States. She has quite an interesting story for us this evening, but I'll give you just a brief summary. She was born in Kiev, in Ukraine, and she trained as a medical doctor with a specialty in pediatric hematology. She was among the first physician responders who were called to the site of the Chernobyl disaster. And within the first few days, she was there ready to see patients, a lot of them in her profession, children. So she has a lot of firsthand experience. And as we know, with the interest in the recent HBO Chernobyl documentary and the more recent potential threats coming out of Ukraine with the war with Russia, the radiation expertise that Dr. Shapiro has are becoming, unfortunately, quite relevant to our day-to-day conversations. She was she took her family out of the Soviet Union in 1989. She traveled through some interesting adventures until she made her way to Maryland. And there she had to retake and redo her medical license, as a lot of foreign doctors are obligated to do when they come to the United States, as their credentials aren't easily transferable. So she had the stamina and the willpower to do it all all over again. So this just shows you the kind of determination she has to take that on. And I've spent a little bit of time tonight with her, and I find that she's just a very interesting, fascinating person, and I hope that you'll be able to see that through this interesting presentation, and you'll save your questions for the end. I will let Dr. Shapiro speak about her own experiences, and I will be back with some information at the end. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and I'm honored to be invited to talk with your community, and I'm so happy that we are here together for our interactive conversation, and I hope you will enjoy personal experiences, stories, and stories of other people. And and I am very grateful to Ina. I think she covered everything. I don't know what I can add in my presentation. She actually told you everything about me. So this is a cover slide, and on the left you see my book. And book consists of three topics, three parts, and with each image, I just wanted to reflect a little bit what's in the book. So to the left, I'm not going to test you what it is because you will fail, I'm sorry. I already tested different audiences, and my favorite answer was this is the rover Mars exploration. The second favorite was volcano with lava eruption in Hawaii. So it's none of the above. This is a construction that was put over the exploded reactor in Ukraine. It's over the Unit 4 construction. And the whole idea was to have this cover with the holes for the ventilation, but the floor design led to very many dangerous radioactive particles that were also spreading across through those holes. So I don't have to spend much time to convince you that the design, that part of the explosion was just flaw design and poorly trained personnel. On the right, it's a just an image of a short version of Stateless, how we went and millions of other people from former Soviet Union through Italy and Austria to reach the United States. And in 1989, when my family immigrated, there was no direct way to go to the United States. The route was to go to Austria, spend time there, and then go to Italy and stay in limbo, not knowing whether you ever will be able to reach the United States. And the third, it's our pride, is so-called strategic national stockpile of our country. These are enormous amount of different medications and medical supplies that designed and stored there for any of the emergencies. It include natural disasters and also radiation, nuclear emergencies, chemical threats, and biological threats. So the parts of these strategic national stockpiles are strategically spread across the country. So within 24 hours after any disaster hit in any of the states across the US, the supply will be delivered there. Next slide, please. I first learned about Chernobyl explosion when my father called me the following day. My dad, for many years, was listening to either Voice of America or BBC to find out exactly what's going on in the Soviet Union. And the only time that we were able to hear an unjammed broadcast was between 3 and 5 a.m. So my dad was always tuned to radio at 5 a.m. and he heard the news about the explosion. So he called me at 6 in the morning. It was Saturday. I was not happy, to answer the call. I was tired. And my dad told me, what happened? There is explosion in Pripyat. And I didn't I was not concerned or didn't think anything negative about what happened because I just was not aware what was Chernobyl, although it was only 60 miles from Kiev, and in particular Pripyat, where all nuclear reactors were located. And the reason that the world calls Chernobyl disaster not Pripyat, because Chernobyl is the closest large city over 9 miles from Pripyat, so the worst nuclear disaster in history has a name, Chernobyl disaster. And in 1986, when it happened, not many people knew about Pripyat. And Pripyat was designed as a Soviet metropolis and was built in 1970 just to house people who were workers and their families from the power station. And Soviet government continuously told people the same. This city was made just for you. And people believe in that. And I have to tell you that Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, where I lived, did not have such modern buildings as Pripyat had at that time. And the beauty of the landscape. Behind the buildings, there were rivers for fishing. There were woods to pick up mushrooms and berries, and fruit trees and roses were everywhere. So it was a real heavenly city. And of course, this heaven on earth ended on the day when deep in the night at 1:23, the city woke up to the worst disaster in history. And as I mentioned, that the reason for the explosion were poorly trained personnel, and they were flaws in the design. So next slide, please. So the government officials did not tell the public about the disaster for 10 days. So the main message was, as I mentioned, you remember we've heard about the news from Voice of America, but the Soviet government and Ukrainian government kept telling people everything is fine, life is business, and everything as usual. But somehow through rumors, all the information was in Soviet Union through the rumors, and rumors sometimes spread faster than radiation, and that's what happened in this particular case. So we were really terrified when we found out, again, not through the official sources, through our friends who worked in different facilities, some government friends, and they told us that how much debris found on the roof of the reactor 4, which blew up. So helicopter pilots flew above the open reactor and were throwing dolomite and clay just to quench the blaze. And the helicopter pilots were people who just returned from Afghanistan. And the country was invaded by Soviets in 1979. And the reason Soviets sometimes, think many steps ahead. And in that particular case, they thought that they were afraid that helicopter pilots would be afraid to fly through the cloud of radiation. They will just say, no, we are not going, and you can put us in jail, do everything, anything you want. So Soviets decided that the best match for this job would be people who, they said, looked death in the eye. And there were people who returned from Afghanistan. That's why they assigned people to that job. But even more horrific, you just saw the slide where volunteers were on the reactor roof, only wearing gloves. All the dosimeters, these are devices to measure radiation, were confiscated, so nobody knew the the level, the magnitude of the exposure. And volunteers were allowed to be on the reactor roof for 90 seconds only. And for that, then the order was just 90 seconds, you count and you drop everything and run. And each volunteer received 2,000 rubles, which equals $35, to be on that deadly premises for 90 seconds. And they all were volunteers. And I watched that live. I was at home watching TV when they showed the reactor roof, and they showed probably 20 soldiers. They all were military. And the commander asked, who would like to go to the reactor roof? No explanation, nothing was provided. And everybody made step forward. Everybody wanted to do the job. And of course, the consequences of that were deadly. And I mentioned that helicopters, pilots flew over the burning reactors for 2 weeks, and over 2 weeks to quench, to put the fire down. And they drop 5,000 tons of clay and dolomite and just to stop the fire. and helicopter pilots and cameramen who were flying over the reactor, they were offered, well, they received at that time experimental Soviet drugs by the name Indralin. You don't have to remember the name of the drug, but I know that many people now know about that. And Indralin was made to protect people from radiation. Although it didn't work, everybody died who took the drug. It was not effective. And in addition, the drug had lots of really bad adverse events. For example, nausea, vomiting, dramatic drop in blood pressure, which of course not good for helicopter pilots. Next slide, please. 36 hours after the explosion, the exodus from Pripyat started. The buses mainly arrived from Kiev, again, about 65 miles from Pripyat, and all people were evacuated from this town, which was heaven, but then became a ghost town, and it's, as of today, this city on the list of the goats town. So people boarded the buses, and they all were told that they're leaving their city for 3 days only. It was another lie the Soviet government wanted to spread to decrease the panic, because panic was always worse than anything what was happening in the Soviet Union. And people boarded the buses with their belongings just for 3 days, and 1,000 buses came just from Kiev and carried exhausted citizens of Pripyat to Kiev. Some buses appeared in the morning, but some buses did not come on time and came late in the evening. So all population who left their houses and apartment buildings with the children and their belongings were outside playing. Kids were playing in radioactive sand and under the shower of radioactive particles. And then the buses brought the exhausted population to Kiev. And passengers were unloaded in different sides of the city, and then the buses were blocked the central of the city where just my family happened to live, so I saw that all. And the drivers from the buses went to public baths, and they were throwing their contaminated clothes everywhere on the chairs, on the floor where other people were putting their clothes, of course not knowing anything, and then were showering and taking baths there. But other team was cleaning the buses, washing the buses with the hoses. And this was in the center of the city. Now, early morning, lots of kids outside, and all these muddy waters that were coming from the buses were forming ponds, where muddy ponds where children were splashing in these contaminated waters. At that time, I worked as a pediatric hematologist in one of the largest clinics in Kiev, and a few days after, I've been a peaceful hematologist in my career, all career time, I became a team leader of the field team that was dispatched to the worst, mostly contaminated areas in Ukraine. And I had 3 of those trips. Nobody gave us any instructions, no protective clothes, no dosimeters, nothing at all. So where children who came from Pripyat, where did they go? As I mentioned, most of them came to Kiev, and then what next? Next, children were mainly sent to different hospitals. The majority went to our hospital. And the overflow of patients, of course, I have never seen anything in any of the emergency rooms or any hospitals where I worked before and after. And our personnel, for 3 days and nights, we did not leave the hospital. We were examining children days and nights, and our family brought us clothes to change and food. And after 3 days, we went home, and for children, there were not too many choices. Some of them who had symptoms, although it was not acute radiation syndrome, I just want to emphasize that. Children did not have acute radiation syndrome. What they mostly had, because they inhaled so many radioactive particles, they were coughing, constantly coughing, and we did not know what it is. So cough, it's usually will be temperature, bronchitis, congested nose, and nothing of that happened. And when we saw a child with a fever and cough, we were happy. Yes, we know what's going on, but for the rest, we did not. And then some of us, again, on the spot said, guys, I think that they just inhaled lots of particles and we need to give them oxygen. So this was the level of guidance that we received. So as I mentioned, the authorities did not tell us anything. Children who were not admitted to the hospital, they went to different, it was summer, it was end of April, it was a very hot summer that year. So children were distributed through different, we call it sanatoriums or different public places just to rest. And many places did not want to accept children from Chernobyl. They called they're dirty. They call them dirty because the population, nobody wanted to hold them because they thought that they're dirty. Of course, this is another, myth that for years I'm trying during my different lectures for students and physicians to take this away so people should not think this way. But even some children who were evacuated to Moscow, the same scenario. Families, none of the family in Moscow, not one, wanted to accept children from Chernobyl. Same reason, they are contaminated, they're dirty, we don't want them. So children were without their parents, but they had somebody who would accompany them. They went from one place to another for weeks, and for weeks, parents did not know where their children are. So through the rumors, we've heard that the situation in Ukraine is bad. I already knew that there are better and worse areas since I already visited for 10 days one of the worst areas. So parents started thinking how to save their children. We need to get them out of Kiev, but I didn't know where the clean place is, and nobody knows. But again, being lucky, one of the neighbors from our apartment building was a physicist with a PhD degree who worked in the Institute of Physics. And his colleagues, put together a real map that would describe contaminated areas in Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus. So he smuggled this map from his work and brought it to our apartment. And he said, if somebody will find out, I will lose my job, and who knows what's going to happen. And I tried to convince him we cannot keep it, of course, public because we'll all go to jail. But let's just gather our close friends and we will see the map. So we unplugged. So few close friends gathered at our apartment building. We unplugged landline phone. We put the drapes down because learning from movies about KGB and spy movies, that's what we learned, that So you cannot be followed by KGB, or whatever you say will not be public. You have to unplug. I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what we did. I was raised on spy movies. So we did all that, and everybody, you know, hovered around above this map, and we immediately realized that Kiev is a hot place. So now, next point, my daughter was 3 years old at the time. Where do we send her? So one of the places that we were just, again, Lady Luck was smiling. One of her aunts lived in Kharkiv, which is, you heard probably more recently about this city, the horrors of war, but at that time it was the cleanest city in Ukraine. And we decided that my daughter will go there with her two grandmothers. But the problem was that there were no tickets. There was no tickets. Everything was sold out, even from the black market. No tickets. So my daughter was under very strict rules at our house. My grandmother was in charge of following, not giving her all my orders. Not She did not have any water from any tap water, because the numbers were horrific in terms of radiation from tap water. So we went and we bought bottled water, and for her we cooked everything, and only with the bottled water. It was not enough in the stores for us, so our family just had regular meals. So finally, because of my mother's connection, my mom was a well-known physician in Kiev, 5 days after this search, she was able to get 3 tickets. And my daughter, with 2 of her grandmothers, was sent to Kharkiv. And next slide, please. So this is how it looked, the evacuation to safer location. My husband and I brought Olga with her grandmothers to the train station. And always, there was a strict ticketing rules. You have to show your ticket and then you go and get to your seat. But that day, that May Day, it was an exception. There was no rules at all, because the parents who did not have the safe place to evacuate their children, they were handing them to the hands of total strangers and begging to take their child to the safe location. So when we got to our seat, then each wagon had at least 3, 4 benches where I called it legal and illegal passengers were sitting. So those children, by generosity and kindness, I even don't have a word, so strangers took them to, to save from the nuclear war. And my grandmother always compared this to the evacuation during World War II. She said that this is exactly what it was, but at that time we tried to save our family from war, but now it's another war, it's a nuclear war. Next, please. Yeah, I have something before that, so just get used to this. This is on the left, you recognize Scream, and it would be very appropriate to characterize what's on that slide. Oh, I want a little step back. When we still were home, before we decided to take our daughter outside, one of my friends, I borrowed the Geiger counter from one of our friends because I wanted to know the levels of radiation in the house. So I was crawling for 2 hours from one room to another, exploring even the flowers outside, my daughter's toys, and after 2 hours of crawling, I forbade Olga to play with any toys. And I start throwing away everything that we had in the house. And then, common sense prevailed, and I realized that I cannot do that because family will be sleeping on the floor, will be eating, without silverware. So I also said, okay, business as usual, brought everything back. But my daughter at that time was hugging and kissing one of her favorite toys. And I said, wait, let me just check this fuzzy body. And I was moving Geiger counter across, and we both were thrilled that it was good. There was no this dreaded click. And then she went kissed this animal in the nose and said, let's wait, let me just check the nose. And I put the Geiger counter to the nose, and the level of radiation was in this nose that probably for the child it's not safe for the entire year to have that level. So I grabbed the toy and I put it in the trash. And so this, I think sometimes I think that my daughter still cannot forgive me the loss of that toy, but that's what I had to do. So this will be a first takeaway message that I would like you to get from this presentation. For years after the Chernobyl, the attention of doctors and scientists were only for how about the cancer rate, and nobody really thought about psychological effects or consequences. In 2005, I was at the WHO meeting in Geneva. And this first slide that really shocked me was that the largest public health problem unleashed by accident, it's a psychological problem. But again, at that time, nobody was prepared for that. Nobody followed this patient. Nobody offered any treatment. Today, why I'm emphasizing that we have disaster after disaster, and another disaster, we don't know which one is around the corner. But all and disasters have differences, but obviously have lots in common. And the most common among all the disaster is severe psychological damage to people, mainly children and elderly, and this is due to evacuation, mainly loss of jobs, houses, and friends. So we always all should remember that and should think that this is what inevitably going to happen, and how to just to be aware of that. This is the goal that I'm trying to convey. Okay, what's next? I hope I'm not running out of time. Okay, this one. Are you surprised that? No? Yeah, I think that our 1 hour meeting now can fit happy hour just looking at that slide. So I brought this slide that as me and other pediatricians struggle to help children, there was overflow of patients to the adult clinic, and there was not enough physicians there. And patients came from nuclear power stations to get evaluation and treatment. So some pediatricians, including myself, were asked to become unlicensed doctors, adult doctors, and go and see adult patients. And I haven't seen adult patients since medical school, and believe me, it's a difference. When you see a child, you don't know how to start your conversation. You tell a story about, 3 piglets, and the child is yours. Everything is good. With adults, I really was not sure what to do, what to say. So I walked into the room, 8 people. Soviet hospitals had big rooms. 8 men, I thought at that time elderly because I was 29, were in the room. and nobody wanted, nobody turned their head to me to say hello, and they look very tired and just didn't want to have any conversation. And then I noticed one man in the corner bed who had this inviting smile, plus he was waving something like a paper. And I came up to him and I said, in my mind, I thought, what should I ask him? I don't know what the first question, but again, from the back of my memory, I remember this like a cheat sheet from the medical school. What do you ask your adult patient? So I approached this gentleman and I asked, what's your complaints? And he looked at me and said, what are you talking about, girl? What complaints? I am grateful to ambulance which brought me here. No complaints. So he misinterpreted my question about health complaints, and so this answer was kind of icebreaker, and we started a nice conversation. And he said, I want to tell you that before Chernobyl accident, and this is our manual. Everybody must know what's in the manual before you start a job there. And my favorite line there was that if something happened, if the accident happened, you have to drink red wine. And he was very serious, and I didn't believe him. And I asked, could you please show where it's written? And he said, no, I can't, because after the accident, people from the above asked us to take these pages out of it's not there. So we had a nice conversation. He had no complaints. And then on my way home, it just bothers me. What's about red wine? So I got home and I mobilized 3 generations of my family to go to the grocery store to get red wine and carry as many bottles as we can. So 3 of us at the grocery store staring at the empty shelves. There was no red wine. So again, spreads, how rumor spreads very quickly. But fast forward, in the United States, and in particular, Penn University, there is a group of scientists that are developing the drug. It calls resveratrol. Again, you don't have to remember the name, but I have to mention it. And this is a drug made of red grapes. And because it has red grapes, they do have protection from radiation, not vodka, not white wine, red wine from red grapes have protection from radiation. So this drug, been developing for many years, has not been shown to the FDA yet, but I talked with the developer, one of the developer, and I said, what do you think, how much red wine? And he said, well, if we don't have a pill, until we have a pill, it's about 720 bottles of red wine that person should drink to have the concentration of that resveratrol as a protective. So you can imagine that after 720, 100 bottles, you don't care about anything, not about radiation. Okay, next, please. Okay, so this concluded part 1 of my book. How much time I have? If I have, I will, 10 minutes, please tell me. More? How many hours? Okay, so part two, I want to take you on a journey of my family and hundreds other that left the former Soviet Union as stateless refugees. We did not have any documents. We had only 40 pound, 20 kilogram per person, and $99 per person. That was it. So why did we leave the country? The first reason is anti-Semitism that all members, all generations of my family felt, and Jews in the Soviet Union were blamed for everything, and I didn't want this for myself, and especially for my daughter. And Soviet government encouraged this policy, and nobody, no, it was like open. It was not possible to practice our religion anywhere. If you showed up in front of synagogue, just showed up, the person will, KGB agent will come up to you and ask, show me your ID, where do you work, and will call your boss on the following or on the same day. So we really did not want to continue living in this, and it was either to continue living in the fear for the entire life or just upend our lives, left everything, apartments, friends, jobs, and leave. And there was a joke that reflects the pervasive blame game that was known across the country, and probably who are Russian people would recognize that, but it's only two lines that beautifully rhyme in Russian, but it took me 2 hours to translate it, but this is how it's translated. In an electricity or water disappearance claim, there is always Jew to blame. How about that? Good. So our immigration route continued with 4 generations of my family, my daughter, my mother, husband, my in-laws, and my grandmother. Total of 7, and I called it Magnificent Seven, and that's how we left. So our time in Austria was only 10 days. I remember every minute of that, but I don't have time to talk about this. Italy. And why Ingrid Bergman picture is here? Because life put us into the place. It's a picturesque suburbs of Rome, Santa Marinella. It's where my family stayed for 6 months. And Santa Marinella, I didn't know it at that time, but now researching, was a place where prominent star Ingrid Bergman and Rossellini lived. When Ingrid, they both were, she was in Sweden, he was in Italy, they were both on the peak of their career, and one day Ingrid wrote a letter to Rossellini. My name is such and such. I can speak very good English, but I don't speak French, and I don't know, I only know one word in Italian, but if you'd like to take me for any movies, I am ready. So that's how they met. The rest is history, and they got married in 1952. And that's how, so she lived exactly the same place where our family lived. Next, please. Again, for the no time, this is just funny touch for Italy that I want to spend literally a few minutes to explain. To the left, this is the apartment where a family of 7 of us lived. There were no windows at all. It looks like a train, and no drapes between the rooms, and whatever people will say about each other, it became public, and everybody knew exactly who is who in this family. To the right were Cohiba cigars. This is what lots of Soviet refugees brought from Soviet Union to sell in so-called Americano. It was an American market where Italians bought things that Soviets brought. And while the focus was on Cohiba cigars, at that time, United States broke all the ties with Cuba, so the flavor of cigars was not there. In the Soviet Union, one cigar wrapped in the beautiful foil cost 4 cents in American money. And anybody who get an access to that did not have to have math degree, because in this Americana in Italy, each cigar costed $15. So this was a very popular. On the, you see the pretty lady, since we did not have our $90 per person did not last for 6 months, we had to go to some places to buy food and to get into on the bus. It was like getting a luxury limousine to go to the party. Nobody had that. So hitchhiking became a very popular mode of transportation. And we even had so-called hitchhiking guide. So young woman with her daughter, preferably blonde, had just a way to go. Then younger sister and grandmother were like, lamed ponies in that. But what happened, the young woman would go in this dramatic gesture, try to stop the car. All her family, fathers, husbands, were hiding in the bushes or in the ditch, because it was a good location because the car will always slow down over there. So the lady, nicely dressed, always wearing heels, will just dramatically stop the car. The driver opened the car, prego signora. Signora smiles, opens the door. All her family jumps on the back and front seats. The driver doesn't know what to do. Signora will say Italia Bellissimo and tell the destination where to go. This is my favorite, but I don't really have time to spend. Again, after meeting, if somebody this described in my book. This lady, former doctor. Okay, I will say a few words. The lady was a doctor in Kiev. She immigrated with her husband and 2 daughters. They were in Italy, no money, and finding jobs was absolutely impossible for refugees. And they did everything that they could to get some additional money. So her name is Lena. So Lena went to one of the cafes in Italy and pretended that she worked as a waitress for 10 years. So she approached the owner and said, "Could you hire me? I worked as a waitress for 10 years. He said, "Yeah, sure," but something was suspicious in either her introduction or description how well she worked. But the family, the cafe was owned by the family, and everybody were really, really nice. They knew that she does not understand or speak Italian, so they would collect the orders from the customer, then placed everything on the plate, and the only thing Lena had to do is nicely deliver. So she had this big tray with soup and whatever it was, and she went to the customer table, but the boss, who somehow suspected something, he was watching her from the back. So she came close to the table where she was supposed to serve with this tray, and she just dropped this tray on the table, and of course the steam and drops of hot soup. So next was like in the movie, the owner jumped out of his hiding, grabbed Lena on the back, said, "What are you doing?" And she didn't blink, and she said, "That's how we serve in Kiev." And he said, "Here is a serving table, right to the customer table, what you're supposed to do." And it's all over the world. You put your tray on the table, and then you serve. So she was fired, like before she was hired. And I met her we were studying together for our medical exams, and she told me that story. So now she's in Texas, practicing physician. Okay, and my last probably part, we're coming. Next slide, please. Oh, one more. Sorry, I don't have time for that. Or if you want to hear this and don't want to hear my US stories, it's your choice. Okay, this is really amazing. We arrived in 1989, and at that time, of course, any luxuries and perfumes were very far from my mind. And this was a year when Elizabeth Arden, who is a Canadian-born woman, established her perfume business across the world, including the United States. Elizabeth Arden is her kind of stage name, business name, but she goes under Florence Graham Nightingale Graham. This is her real name, and again, born in Canada, so you're probably very proud of that. But 2 years later, someone introduced me and told about this line which called Red Door, and again, it was far from what I was doing that time, studying for my medical exams. No, I already was a fellowship at National Institute of Health, National Cancer Institute. And I was a second-year fellow. One of the attending physicians from the pediatric floor came up to me with an unusual offer. He told me that in Ireland, famous American actor Paul Newman is establishing camp for children who suffered who had cancers and leukemia, and they from Chernobyl and from Ukraine and Belarus. And he asked if I would like to go and work at that camp. And of course I did. And in the suburbs of Dublin. And these physicians lived, there were three of us, lived in this castle, which is 500 years old, now it's 520 years old. And Elizabeth Arden lived in that house, and she died there. After she died, Irish government bought this castle. And then when Paul Newman showed up and was looking for nice facility, the Irish government said, okay, you can buy, we cannot give it to you as a gift because we are government, but give us $1.50 and the castle is yours. And this is what happened. So Paul Newman bought the castle, and it's absolutely astounding, amazing facility. And children from Ukraine and Belarus, they already had cancers or leukemias, but we only accepted those who were in remission. So we don't have to provide them hard chemotherapy. We just were watching them, and they were fishing. They went fishing and hot air balloon, and it was an amazing entertainment, and everything was for free. So the castle still, after Elizabeth Arden had the castle, she refurnished, she repainted everything, and it still has the straight, so all doors in the castle are painted in red. So this is what I took this picture when I worked there, and I worked there for 2 weeks as a physician, and an interpreter, and it was unforgettable experience. Okay. So after 6 months staying in Italy, still not thinking or knowing where we're going, because the United States rejected lots of people. And the reason was that the US did not envision so many statelets that they will coming to the US. So they basically did not have money for all of us. And Jewish community stepped and brought lots of help. Also, there were demonstrations in Washington, D.C., in front of consulate, trying to get refuseniks. We became Italian refuseniks. It's a new combination. Before it was Soviet refuseniks who were not allowed to leave the Soviet Union. We were Italian refuseniks. And in November of 1989, the Congress passed Lautenberg Amendment that every person who came between that time, before November, and was there in limbo, does not have to prove anything about persecution. By default, every person who came from the Soviet Union is considered refugee. So this how all our family left in December of 1989, and we landed. The plane landed in Washington D.C., and we had an incredible warm reception from American Jewish community. We made friends in a couple of weeks, and quite few of them still some of our best friends. And we consider Maryland our home, and from the moment that this touched down. Next, please. Okay, so in the US, I had all my recertification and became a doctor again with all American credentials. And I spent 20 years with Food and Drug Administration as a medical officer. For the first 3 years, I was at the oncology drug products as my profession, but then after September 11, Congress charged the FDA to open new office called Office of Counterterrorism and Emergency Coordination. It's been a stopper for any conversation I ever had. Are you a doctor? Yes. Where do you work? Oh, Office of Counterterrorism. Oh my God. So yes, the mission of the office was to help pharmaceutical companies, academia, and private investigators to develop drugs against either radiation exposure, chemical threats, or biological threats. And they were looking for physicians with corresponding background. And unfortunately or fortunately, my Chernobyl experience was the one that they hired me 3 hours after my all-day interview. They called me, and I spent 20 years doing that, 17 years doing that. And I attended multiple domestic and international congresses, and at each international conferences, I got the same question: what were first medical responders at Chernobyl least prepared for? And my answer never changed. I said everything. So, which is true. So this is a very important part. This is called animal rule, was evoked by the FDA in 2002 for one reason: to develop and approve drugs against radiation, and other biological or chemical threats. And the reason that, for example, we are developing drug against radiation, we cannot give the lethal dose of radiation to humans and then study the drug. So there is a different model, different pathway for the drug approval. So first we labs test small animals, and then if the drug is effective and safe, they go to large animals. They don't do testing of the efficacy in people for the reasons that I just mentioned, but safety, they test safety on healthy volunteers. So this is what briefly animal rule is about. Next, I think this is the last, I hope. Yeah, and FDA, I collaborated with lots of government agencies, Armed Forces Radiobiology Institute, one of the largest, unique in the country, and other Department of Defense, many, many others who were just also participating in not so much drug development, but preparedness and response. And I got this plaque from, it's called Lichtenberg tree. Again, it's unique. It's just a piece of plastic got hit by electrons, and they call it Lichtenberg tree because every tree is different. There is no two similar trees. I hope this is it. Yeah. Okay, the time for question. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for me to go over time. Yeah, this is Einstein. This is a monument in Washington, D.C. It's not visible. You have to know where it is. And this is my niece. Thank you. Any questions?
How many people died in Chernobyl, and how did they follow people who did not die but were otherwise affected?
Okay. So 20. So the death from radiation could be acute or immediate or could be late. During the first days and weeks, 28 people died of acute radiation syndrome. Only 28. They died, most of them died in a couple of days. But then there was a group of people who had a combination. Most, again, we learn it much later that it's usually a combination of damage to more than one system to die of radiation. And radiation burns with other damage were one of the most common. So about 130 people died in the, again, first month. So this is what acute. And the death from burns, it's unimaginable that, for example, the night shift when the reactor exploded, they did not have keys from the locker rooms. They came for their night shift and they were supposed to go home at 6 in the morning when the new shift came. That's it. So they did not have the key. So they were in radiation, soaking in the highly irradiated water, not being able to change. So they developed severe radiation burns, and those people, most of them died. So later, from cancer, thyroid cancer did not cause death, but it was just a very prevalent because population did not receive potassium iodide that people who were exposed must get 6 to 8 hours after the exposure. And this will protect the thyroid gland from cancer in the future, not other organs, just thyroid gland. And it's effective 6 to 8 hours after exposure. And the official from politicians, not from physicians, came 10 days after for the population of Kiev that kids should start getting potassium iodine, which was absolutely useless. In terms of other cancers, main cancer, not so many bone cancer. So I would just give the number. It's between 3 and 4,000 deaths of different cancers 20 to 25 years after the radiation, not immediate. And again, you will see different numbers. It's very, very, very difficult to ascertain, the true numbers, but this is what I can say. No, that's it. Well, thank you again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shapiro. This was very interesting, in my opinion. Thank you for coming, everybody, and I hope to see you at our next installment of Tuesday Night Learning next week, November 1st. We'll have Israel Biton, who will be speaking about memory and who will remember us after we're gone. We have another one on November 8th. It'll be Debbie Applegate, and she'll talk about a different kind of Jew, a madam, who was well known in New York City during its golden age. And November 15th, we'll have Isabel Vincent in conversation with our very own Gideon Zellermeyer. So I hope you'll join us for those interesting presentation as well. And now you can purchase Dr. Shapiro's book just in the back, and she'll be happy to sign it for you. If you have time to wait. Thank you.